Someone, they say, found Kayla unresponsive that afternoon. The bartender was pronounced dead on the scene.
The caller said that there's a gash on the patient's neck. It looks like someone slashed her neck.
911, where's your emergency? I just walked out my apartment. She's at the bottom of the stairs, head fucked up and blood everywhere. Is she conscious? Hey, baby girl. Hello? Do you want me to get her idea? Her name is Denita Smith. Denita. Let's see you move, man. Just really appreciate you calling in for her, and we do have help on the way over there.
He said, I'll make it real simple. Either your children die or you die for your children. And he knew at that point it wasn't a question. I told him, okay, that was fine. I called into work. I told him that my son had a doctor's appointment and that I would be late.
That was 28-year-old Shannon Crawley being interrogated by law enforcement after she was accused of murdering her boyfriend's fiancée, 25-year-old Denita Smith. Shannon was said to have sneaked up to Denita while she was leaving her campus apartment in January 2007 and heartlessly fired at her at the back of her head. Shannon committed this crime simply because she was sharing the same man with Denita, but as it turned out, Denita was chosen over her, which triggered the devil in Shannon. Sadly, this is not the only time something like this is happening. There have been several other cases where women murdered their fellow women just to keep a man. Most of the time, those men are not even worth keeping. So, what makes these women so desperate that they would go the length of brutally murdering a fellow woman? In today's videos, we will be going over some of these cases of side chicks who murdered their boyfriend's other girlfriends just to keep the man. Denita Smith. Denita Smith was a young woman of just 25 years old who had her life together with everything going on well for her.
Denita was one of the most ambitious people that you've ever met. She was always on the go. She always looked good, always dressed very tastefully.
Denita Smith was very, very popular, very pretty girl, seemed to have everything in the world going for her.
She had dedicated 6 years to her undergraduate studies and was now pursuing a master's degree at North Carolina Central University. Her hard work and dedication were finally paying off. With her sights set high, Denita had secured a prestigious fellowship with the New York Times, thanks to her exceptional talent in journalism and photography.
Very pretty girl, seemed to have everything in the world going for her. She had interest in journalism.
For someone as young as Denita, the world seemed full of possibilities, and she was eager to seize them all. In her personal life, Denita was equally blessed. She had found love with Jameer Stroud, a man she had met during her college years.
Jameer and Denita met on the campus of North Carolina Central University. They were part of the Sound Machine, which is the marching band at NCCU.
Their love story was one that many people in their circle would envy.
They met, I think, in 2000, and they started dating pretty quickly after they met.
I mean, they had like Michelle and Barack Obama potential, definitely. They were the power couple.
After 6 years of dating, Jameer had recently proposed, and Denita, filled with happiness, accepted without hesitation.
She showed that ring everywhere. She kind of always did this and to make sure that she noticed the ring, but she was very, very proud.
The future seemed to be laid out perfectly for them, a future full of shared dreams and aspirations. But life, with all its unpredictability, had other plans. After graduation, Denita stayed in Durham to continue her education, while Jameer moved to Greensboro to begin his career as a police officer.
He went off to become a police officer, and they continued to date while he was working.
Though distance separated them, their bond remained strong. Love letters, phone calls, and weekend visits kept the flames of their romance alive.
Denita talked about Jameer all the time. How he was coming to visit one weekend or she was going out to visit him.
Yet, as strong as their love seemed, there were deadly cracks in their relationship that Denita was not aware of.
She would have dropped it right then and there. She had too much pride. She was too driven and didn't have time for that nonsense or the drama and wouldn't have anything to do with it. She was better than that.
Unfortunately, on the morning of January 4th, 2007, those cracks would break open and consume Denita's life. That morning, Denita was leaving her Campus Crossings apartment, and as she was about to walk down the complex stairs, someone came up behind her and put a bullet in her head, sending her tumbling down the stairs. Moments later, Corey Smith, a resident at the Campus Crossings, stepped out of his apartment at 10 a.m. As he descended the staircase, his eyes were drawn to a trail of scattered belongings. At the bottom of the stairs, he saw a woman lying motionless. Initially, Corey thought she had simply fallen, but as he got closer, his heart sank. The woman was lying in the pool of red and didn't seem to be breathing. In his panic, Corey immediately picked up his phone and called 911. It was only when officers arrived that the woman's identity was confirmed. It was indeed Denita Smith. The officers also quickly discovered that Denita hadn't fallen. Someone had put a bullet in her head. The news of Denita's death was a devastating blow to everyone who knew her. In an instant, a life full of promise had been extinguished, and the questions on everyone's mind were, who did this to Denita? And why? As law enforcement started their investigation, more pieces of the puzzle began to emerge. Around the same time that Corey found Denita, another 911 call was made. The caller was Michael Hedgepeth, the maintenance director at the apartment complex, and he reported hearing the sound of gunfire at around 8:10 that morning. Following the gunfire, Michael said he drove his car towards the direction of where the sound came from, and that was when he ran into a distraught who was about to drive out of the parking lot.
He saw a black female walking kind of fast and had her hands over her mouth.
This unidentified woman was crying, clearly shaken, and when Michael asked if she had heard the gunfire, she confirmed it.
Boo-hoo crying. That is how he described it. She was very distraught, extremely upset, said she'd heard the gunfire and was trying to make sense out of what happened.
The maintenance man pulled alongside.
He asked her, "Ma'am, are you okay?" Because she's kind of shaking this and looks a little distraught. And she shakes her head no. He says, did you hear a shot? And she shakes her head yes.
But before he could say another word, the tall black woman with a ponytail drove off in her burgundy SUV. You see, with cases like this, the victim's partner is usually among the first set of people to be questioned by the investigators to know if they had anything to do with their partner's death or know someone who might have done it. In this case, the victim's partner, being a law enforcement officer, who's of course very good with weapons, added to the suspicion that he might have done it.
That shot dead center in the back of the head. One typically thinks good marksman.
I mean, it's hard to hit someone in the back of the head with a single gunshot.
Finding that her fiance, is a law enforcement officer, rose an eyebrow.
However, when investigators broke the news of Denita's tragic death to Jermier, he was completely devastated. But as the investigation progressed, law enforcement began to ask Jermier some really tough questions concerning his whereabouts on the day of the murder. Jermier explained that he had worked the night before and had been asleep at the time Denita was murdered.
Jermier said on the morning of the murder, actually, he was at home in bed because he had just worked the night before.
After verifying Jermier's alibi, investigators turned their focus to finding the mysterious woman who was seen around the murder scene that day, the one who drove off in a burgundy SUV. Luckily enough, Jermier told investigators that he knew someone who drove a burgundy SUV, the same kind of vehicle that had been seen fleeing the scene. The woman in question was Shannon Crawley, a single mother of two who worked as a 911 dispatcher in Greensboro. Jermier revealed that he had once had an affair with Shannon, but insisted that it had ended about a year before Denita's death.
He asked for her phone number. She gave it to him. The intention was that they were going to be friends, keep in touch.
From close friends, and then in September, I believe it was, the relationship turned physical.
Like a relationship of convenience. Friends with benefits is probably a good way to describe it.
He had never introduced Shannon to Denita, and as far as he knew, the two women had never met. But Shannon knew about Denita and Jermier. She had become obsessed with Jermier, even after their affair ended, moving into his neighborhood and joining his church in an attempt to stay close to him.
That was kind of the end of their mutual dating relationship.
She started coming to his church. She actually ended up eventually buying a home in his neighborhood.
Armed with this information, investigators quickly brought her in for questioning. However, she denied ever meeting Denita and insisted she had no reason to harm her. She claimed she had been at home caring for her sick child on the morning of the murder and only went to work later that day.
She said that she decided not to take her child to the doctor's appointment, so she called for a babysitter. And then she decided to go into work later on.
However, investigators did not entirely believe Shannon's story, so they quickly obtained a search warrant for her SUV, and when the car was examined, investigators found traces of cartridge discharge residue inside the car.
The police and forensics found there was a gunpowder residue on the steering wheel of the car.
Now, Shannon will have a lot of explanations to make, and if she insists she wasn't the one who pulled the trigger that took Denita's life, then she would have to come up with a reasonable explanation as to why there is firearms discharge residue inside her car. Unfortunately for her, before she could wriggle her way out of that, more damning evidence against her surfaced. One of Shannon's co-workers came forward and admitted that he had sold her a .38 caliber revolver just a few months before the murder.
She had a co-worker that came up and said, "So I want to tell you that I sold Shannon Crawley a gun."
Meanwhile, Shannon had already told investigators that she didn't own a gun. That she owned a gun wasn't just the problem, but why lie about it? Plus, the gun she owned was a .38 caliber revolver, which matched with the bullet shell casing found at the scene of Shannon's murder.
After receiving the bullet fragment from the medical examiner's office, it was determined that the bullet was a .38 caliber.
The individual that sold the gun to Shannon stated that he sold her a .38 caliber revolver.
Though Shannon claimed she had thrown the gun away, the investigators were unable to find it at the spot where she said she had dumped it.
She thought that even though she had the gun, she wouldn't be capable of firing it had the circumstances arisen.
She said that she was very fearful of guns, so she threw that gun away.
Shannon's phone records revealed that she had been in Durham, near Denita's apartment complex, on the day of the murder, contradicting her claim that she had been at home all day, caring for her sick child.
She was in Durham the day of the offense and extremely close to the address of the victim's apartment complex.
The case against Shannon grew stronger with each new piece of evidence. When she eventually went to trial, the prosecution argued that her obsession with Jermier had driven her to a jealous rage, leading her to murder this young, innocent woman who did nothing wrong to her. They portrayed Shannon as a vengeful woman who couldn't let go, even going so far as to accuse Jermier of breaking into her home and forcing himself on her a few months after Denita's murder in a desperate attempt to deflect suspicion from herself.
Her dogs were barking because they heard someone outside, and so she went outside to walk her dogs, and Jermier was there and her for 3 hours.
But that was a lie, because investigators were able to establish that on the day of the alleged assault incident, Jermier was miles away in the opposite direction and would have had to drive at approximately 120 miles per hour without stopping for red lights to have committed that crime.
He was in Greensboro when he was supposed to be raping her at 2:30 in the morning in Charlotte.
He has a receipt that he was in Greensboro at McDonald's.
She also presented a false call recording in court where Jermier threatened her and admitted to murdering his girlfriend, Denita.
No, you don't do anything. You need to tell the truth. Man, I ain't going to you. And I'm supposed to, that's what I didn't do? You gonna kill me too?
However, the investigators burst her lies once again because the voice in the doctored call recording sounded nothing like Jermier.
We all heard Jermier testify, and he had a pretty deep voice. And whoever this person was on the other end of the phone was, had a high-pitched voice.
Even with all her lies bursted and all the overwhelming incriminating evidence against her, Shannon still maintained her innocence, insisting that she had nothing to do with Denita's death, and continued accusing Jermier of being the real culprit.
Shannon's testimony was almost a mirror image of the story that she gave in May of 2007. If you didn't have the proof, you might have believed her. She was convincing. If you ignored the facts, she was very convincing.
But the jury, after hearing all the evidence, didn't believe her. They found her guilty of first-degree murder, and she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The trial brought no comfort to Denita's grieving family. Her mother, heartbroken and angry, expressed her desire for Shannon to rot in hell, while her father thanked the jury for delivering justice for his daughter.
I hope you rot in hell. Because you took something from me. You had no right to do that. She didn't do anything. You shouldn't even know you.
Shannon's parents, however, remained steadfast in their belief that their daughter was innocent, blaming Jermier for everything that happened. And they were actually right. Not right that their daughter was innocent, but right that Jermier was responsible for this entire tragic situation. If he had remained faithful to Denita, then none of these would have happened. Denita would still be alive today. Rachel King. Rachel King was a devoted teacher at Grover Cleveland Elementary School. You see, Rachel wasn't just any teacher. She was the kind that students remembered long after they'd left her classroom. She had a way of making each child feel special, encouraging them to dream big and never be afraid to reach for the stars. Her students adored her, and her colleagues respected her deeply for the passion she brought to her work. But Rachel's life wasn't just about teaching. At home, she was a loving and dedicated mother to her 11-year-old son, Jalen. He was her world, the person she loved more than anything. Rachel poured all her energy into giving Jalen the best life possible, raising him to be kind, smart, and brave. To everyone who knew Rachel, she seemed like she had it all: a fulfilling career, a wonderful son, and a life full of love. However, life can sometimes take unexpected and heartbreaking turns. Rachel had been in a long-term relationship with a man named William Hayes. William and Rachel had shared many good years together, but things began to fall apart when William got involved with another woman, Julie Jean. Julie was 34, and her relationship with William wasn't just a passing fling. It had serious consequences for everyone involved. When Rachel discovered William's affair, it must have felt like her whole world was crumbling. But instead of walking away, William chose to stay with Rachel and end things with Julie. However, Julie didn't take the breakup well. In fact, she couldn't let go. Her heart was filled with anger and jealousy, and she began to harass both William and Rachel. She would show up at their apartment uninvited, making their lives a living nightmare. The situation got so bad that William had to get a protection order against Julie, hoping it would keep her away.
But Jean harassed both Hayes and the victim, watching them, texting them, calling so much that Hayes actually sought court relief, filing and receiving a protection from abuse order on Julie Jean last December.
But Julie's obsession with Rachel grew darker and more dangerous with each passing day. Soon, she began to fantasize about how to hurt Rachel and get revenge on her. She blamed Rachel for taking away her man and decided that Rachel had to pay with her life. Driven by her twisted thoughts, Julie reached out to a man named Zaki Al-Hakim, the cousin of her child's father.
The connection between both suspects is through the father of Jean's 3 children, who is Al-Hakim's cousin.
Together, they formed a deadly partnership, plotting how they would end Rachel's life. For months, Julie and Zaki stalked Rachel. They followed her, took pictures of her, and carefully studied her daily routine.
Officials say Jean and Al-Hakim plotted the cold-blooded killing for months ahead of time, exchanging hundreds of texts discussing a plan.
She's holding up a picture of the victim, Rachel King, that Al-Hakim takes a picture of. Her hand, her phone, showing the victim.
They knew where she lived, where she worked, and what time she left home each day. They were very patient, waiting for the perfect moment to strike.
On February 20th, Al-Hakim saved this Google image to his photos. It's the apartment complex where Rachel and her son lived, with a pin dropped on Rachel's exact apartment and a red arrow showing the route to take to get to the residence.
The perfect time to execute their evil plans finally came on April 11th, 2023. That morning, Rachel was driving her son Jalen to his violin practice, but she had no idea she was being followed as she headed to a Dunkin' drive-thru to grab some breakfast.
This was driven by the defendant as he followed Rachel from her residence to the Dunkin' Donuts drive-thru, where he exited the vehicle and shot her multiple times.
While she grabbed breakfast, Zaki had already parked his Mercury Sable nearby, watching and waiting for the perfect time to strike.
The vehicle was sold for $1,500 and bought in Julie Jean's name. And then Al-Hakim is using it.
When the moment came, he approached Rachel's Ford Edge car and fired multiple bullets through the driver's side window. Rachel never stood a chance of survival as she was murdered instantly, right in front of her son. Fortunately, Jalen, who was sitting in the back seat, sustained no physical injuries, but the trauma of witnessing his mother's murder would haunt him forever. In the hours following this horrific incident, Philadelphia law enforcement found the Mercury Sable that Zaki had used to commit the crime.
After we put that photo out of the Mercury Sable shortly after Rachel's killing, Philadelphia police on patrol spotted the vehicle and in the early evening attempted to pull it over.
When they tried to stop the car, Zaki attempted to flee, leading the officers on a chase that ended with him crashing into a fence. Zaki was then arrested on the spot, but the story didn't end there.
Al-Hakim took off at a high rate of speed, stopping only when he crashed into a fence.
As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered more about the man who had taken Rachel's life. Apparently, this wasn't the first time Zaki had made an attempt on someone's life. Just days before Rachel's murder, he had been involved in another murder case. Ballistic tests linked the bullet casings found at both crime scenes to the same gun, a so-called ghost gun that was privately made and untraceable.
Guess what? We didn't recover the gun, but we recovered a photo that our experts say, and this photo was on Al-Hakim's cell phone and was taken on March 16, 2023.
The evidence against Zaki was mounting, but it wasn't just him who would face justice. The mastermind behind the plot, Julie, was also arrested. However, she had tried to cover her tracks by deleting incriminating messages from her phone, but by then, it was already too late.
Jean deleted nearly 800 text messages between her and Al-Hakim on April 12th, just 13 minutes before she was interviewed by detectives.
The detectives managed to recover enough evidence to piece together the terrible truth. They found messages between Julie and Zaki, including one final communication sent through Cash App just before Rachel's murder.
And that was at 12:11 p.m., less than 5 hours after Rachel's killing. And it was a payment of $5 with an emoji message that we interpreted to mean link up, message me, no phones, that's it.
As the case went to trial, the full extent of Julie and Zaki's crimes was revealed. The jury was shown the chilling evidence: surveillance footage of Zaki's car waiting near Rachel's home, the pictures he had taken of Rachel as he stalked her, and even the photo of the murder weapon he had foolishly kept on his phone. By the end of the trial, it didn't take long for the jury to reach a verdict. After just 52 minutes of deliberation, they found Julie Jean and Zaki Al-Hakim guilty of Rachel's murder. Both were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. During their victim impact statements, Rachel's parents spoke of the immense grief they felt, but also of their decision to forgive the criminals, hoping that someday they would find redemption. Rachel's father, Reverend Alan King, reflected on the tragedy, saying that while nothing could bring his daughter back, he hoped to move forward with his grandson, carrying on Rachel's legacy of love and kindness.
There really were no winners today. This was not a winning situation at all. My daughter is gone. This does not bring her back. We're glad to have memories of her, but my heart grieves, aches.
Kayla Hodgson. Kayla Hodgson was a young woman full of life. She was the kind of person who brought light into any room she entered, with her bright smile and warm presence.
She was bright, she was beautiful, she was everybody's hype man.
Kayla worked as a bartender for a company that handled private events, where her hard work and friendly nature made her well loved by her colleagues and customers alike. But Kayla wasn't just about work. She loved to enjoy herself, especially at night. She was a familiar face in the Florida nightlife, often seen out with her friends, dancing, laughing, and living life to the fullest. It was during one of these nights that Kayla's life would intersect with a man named Terry. At the time they met, Terry was in a serious relationship with another woman named Sakina Thompson. At just 28 years old, Sakina was a well-known nail technician in Long Island, New York. Her skills had earned her quite a reputation, and she was popular among her clients. Sakina's relationship with Terry was a rocky one. Their relationship was anything but stable, marked by constant arguments and breakups, only for them to get back together each time. It was a cycle of chaos that seemed to have no end. Despite their toxic relationship, they stuck together, perhaps out of habit, or maybe out of some twisted sense of attachment. The story took a dark turn when Terry and Sakina decided to take a trip down to Miami. They were there to party, to escape their usual surroundings, and maybe find some relief from their turbulent relationship. It was during this trip that Terry met Kayla. What started as a harmless interaction soon became something more, something that ended with Terry having an affair with Kayla. When Sakina found out about this affair, jealousy quickly consumed her. Sakina wasn't the type to sit back and let things slide just like that. In her anger, she decided to take matters into her own hands. Meanwhile, she had previously installed a tracker in Terry's Range Rover. Well, that just shows you the level of mistrust in their relationship. So now she used the tracker to discover that Terry had gone to Kayla's house. Driven by rage, she followed the signal, leading her straight to Kayla's apartment. By the time Sakina arrived, Terry had already left, but that didn't stop her. What happened next was a brutal act of violence. In a fit of rage, Sakina broke into Kayla's apartment and attacked her with a sharp object, cutting her from ear to ear. The scene she left behind was gruesome to show how far Sakina was willing to go just to keep a cheating man.
Let's take you back to earlier this month, July 13th. That's when family and friends tell us 23-year-old Kayla was found dead in her Tamarack apartment. Someone, they say, found Kayla unresponsive that afternoon. The bartender was pronounced dead on the scene.
The caller said that there's a gash on the patient's neck. It looks like someone slashed her neck.
After committing this horrific act, Sakina didn't run or hide. Instead, she met up with Terry later that day, as if nothing had happened. The couple flew back to New York together, leaving behind the gruesome crime scene and the lifeless body of a young woman who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. It wasn't long before Kayla's body was discovered. The sight was shocking, and it wasn't immediately clear who could have done something this terrible to her.
It's been slightly more than a week since Kayla Hodgson was murdered.
Her life was gone way too soon. Today, Local 10 talks to a friend of the family. Her loved ones remain too heartbroken to speak. We love her. We miss her. We know we're praying for justice. Law enforcement was at a loss and turned to the public for help, hoping someone might know something that could lead them to the killer. Weeks passed, and the investigation continued. Eventually, the investigators were able to piece together the events leading up to Kayla's death. All evidence pointed to Sakina Thompson. On July 25th, a warrant was issued for her arrest. She was eventually captured in Springfield Gardens and extradited to Broward County, where she faced a charge of first-degree murder. The evidence against her was damning. It was clear that Sakina had committed the crime, and the details of her actions were chilling. Her arrest brought some relief to those who had been following the case, but for Kayla's family, the pain was far from over. Sakina's time in jail was far from the life she had been used to. The reality of incarceration hit her hard, and she soon realized that the glamorous life she had once flaunted was nothing compared to the harshness of prison. Desperate to escape, she wrote a letter to the judge, pleading for mercy. She was pregnant and terrified of giving birth behind bars. Her letter was heartfelt, begging for a chance to have her baby outside of prison, to be able to care for her child while she awaited trial. Her letter reads, "To your Honorable Judge Casey, I'm writing this letter to you in hope of finding mercy from the court to allow me to give birth outside of jail while also fighting my case. Please have sympathy for me, being that I am a first-time mother and have no priors, never been in trouble before. I am terrified of going into labor while incarcerated because this facility is not properly suitable to accommodate a pregnant woman. I have been incarcerated August 3rd, 2022, when I was 11 weeks and due February 11th, 2023. Spending my entire pregnancy locked up has been stressful. I have a stable place as well as family to vouch for me. I'm asking you for the opportunity to mother my newborn baby while I fight for my innocence. Please take everything that I have said into consideration while making a decision on whether I may be released on bond, pretrial, monitor, etc. Thank you for your time and consideration on this matter." But the judge was unmoved. The gravity of her crime outweighed her pleas for leniency. Her request was denied, and she was told in no uncertain terms that she would remain behind bars until her trial. The judge's words were clear. Her actions were too severe to allow her the freedom she sought, even temporarily. As of the time of making this video, there have been no further updates on Sakina Thompson's case. She remains in a Florida prison, to the best of our knowledge, awaiting trial and likely working closely with her defense attorneys to try and secure a lighter sentence. However, given the nature of her crime, it's hard to imagine a scenario where she would receive anything but the harshest of punishments. Kayla's family, meanwhile, continues to wait for justice. They hope that when the trial finally comes, Sakina will be held accountable for her actions, and that Kayla's life, which was so tragically cut short, will be honored in the form of a just and fair punishment. The road to justice may be long, but they remain steadfast, hoping that one day they will see the person responsible for Kayla's death spend the rest of her life behind bars. What do you think about these 3 cases? Do you think these women would be regretting their actions right now, knowing that taking a fellow woman's life because of a man is not worth it? Thank you for watching, guys. Feel free to share your thoughts with us in the comments below, and if you have enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more videos like this.